Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Billy Howle to talk all about his latest movie, Infinite Storm. And the first thing I was really fascinated by was what your character development process looked like for this project, because you're performing in a role that, instead of being very dialogue driven and having a very verbose character, it's very much about physical effects on him, the physical movement of the role, the underlying emotion of a lot of things which aren't necessarily kind of said out loud, but you're still playing to. And so how did that shift and shape your character development process? Was it very similar to the way that you tend to approach other characters, or was there any differences for you because of that?
Yeah, so really interesting question to kick us right off the bat. I love it. Yeah, so the first thing to mention really was the time scale involved. It all happened really rapidly, and sometimes that happens. And I think we were looking to make this film at a point where everything had kind of just completely frozen, for want of a better phrase. And so we were very, very fortunate in that we got the go ahead to go to Slovenia and do this thing. But what it meant was that everything snowballed. I keep using these things that are snow related. That it snowballed quite quickly, and so suddenly I was, in Slovenia, and we were about to make this thing on the side of a mountain. And I don't have like a fixed process as an actor. I mean, I have things that certain things that I will do kind of religiously in terms of breaking down script, and the beginnings of characterization often look quite similar from project to project, and there's quite a lot of crossover in that regard. But I also like to feel my way into what a character is, and how I figure out who they are can really be wildly different from project to project. And so, in this one, I sort of knew instinctively this isn't going to be, hugely cerebral. The story itself is so physical. It's about these two people that really are put through their paces in terms of endurance, in terms of survival, because that is essentially what it is. And but the other thing to mention is that outside of what was in the script and the article and the conversations and research that Josh, the writer, had done in piecing this script together, I didn't have any other material, but I knew that John was a real person, right? So, it was kind of interesting. It could quite easily, because of the nature of what happens to John, actually what happens to both of them, it could quite easily slip into something that we definitely didn't want it to. But it's kind of absurd. These things keep going wrong. And just when they think that, they're in the clear and they're kind of right near the end of their journey together, something else happens. And so that's kind of, for me, it was interesting. And I highlighted this when I was speaking to Malgo and Naomi about it. I was like, it's very similar. It's reminiscent of how comedy works. You repeat something, and you put more emphasis on it the next time, and you draw someone's attention to it even more so. And I thought that was really interesting to play around with, because we weren't, straight off the bat, we weren't answering the question, well, why is John up there, right? We don't want to reveal our hand too soon. And we were sort of, if I'm in all honesty, we were sort of still figuring those things out too. I had a pretty good idea as to how John had found himself in that situation. And again, me, the actor, and as the human being, I was sort of aware that John is out there somewhere. And the likelihood is that, if he hears about this film being made, he might go and see this, And because I didn't have the luxury of being able to speak to John, and I totally understand that, and I do understand why, anonymity is important. I mean, more than most, I would say. But it's like, I wanted to be careful, because I didn't want to at all sort of, trivialize or make a mockery of what happened to John. But what I did want to do was highlight actually how absurd it is to find two human beings on the side of a mountain, and sort of how potentially humorous it could be if you were to find yourself in those situations, in a similar situation, that someone would put their own life at risk in order to help you and save yours. Like, what is it about, you know, a person that drives someone to want to do that, and not only that, but persist in that pursuit, you know, so much so fervently as Pam Bales does. You know, I was kind of fascinated by that. And then, you know, why is John so resistant, you know, to the point of this sort of juvenile petulance? So those were really fun things to play with. I don't know if that answers your question, but those were the things that were going through my head in terms of creating John as a character, and the fact that I didn't have so much to say straight away meant that you know, I was using, you know, my physicality much more so, you know, to try to tell the story. And it's a tough ask, you know, to be honest. And given that we had a sort of time constraint on top of that, you know, it was a lot to try and piece together. But, you know, hopefully I've done something worthwhile with it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And with the physicality of the role as well, when you did on Chesil Beach, you were working with Imogen Knight, who was a movement coordinator. And are there kind of like tools that working with someone like her really gave you that you were able to bring forth into a role like this, even though obviously the physical elements of those two characters are so disparately different, but just in terms of the way it makes you think about your body and the different things that you can do and the way that you can communicate through performance?
Yeah, I am. That's again a really interesting question. When I found out what it was, I mean, I've always been a very physical performer. I started off actually doing dance when I was a kid, and so I've always had a pretty good understanding of what my body does and how it sort of behaves, and I have a good connection to my body. And in fact, it's the first thing I noticed. Like, if I know I'm not well or that something's wrong, it's all tied up with my intuition. It's tied up with, like, you know, not that I'm a hugely superstitious person or anything like that, but I do sense things, right? And then someone said to me, do you know about the vagus nerve? And I was like, no, what is that? And there's this whole thing that's to do with sort of connecting to your emotions, and it's to do with the vagus nerve. And some people have like a clear channel, right, where you can just, and the exercise we did, actually, this is at drama school, was to like sit on your hands and then stare into someone's eyes and think sad things, right? Or think sad thoughts, or even try to perceive the sadness in the person opposite you. And this is all to do with your vagus nerve. And I had this sort of kind of epiphany, really, but my whole body sort of changed. I had this sort of visceral reaction to the sadness that I noticed in this person opposite me. And I was like, yeah, okay, I understand now. I understand how I am actually physically embodying sadness in quite a noticeable way. What happens if I amplify that, right? What happens if I try to push that out, to emanate that? And, you know, and I sort of could, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So there's a scale, there's so much that I could do. I could make this bigger, I could make the sadness bigger. And for some reason, I don't know why, it's a kind of recurring thing for me, is that, you know, I guess I'd be called a tragedian back in the day. I'm always sort of doing that, or finding myself in those positions, right? So for some reason, you know, on some level, I understand like loss and grief and, you know, extreme sadness or sorrow quite well. And in terms of like physicality, I don't sort of make a distinction when I feel things. You know, the other thing someone said to me that was interesting is the part of your brain that deals with pain, like physical pain, is the same part that deals with emotional pain. So it's the same like chemical reaction going on, right? That's telling your body that it's in pain. And so that's really interesting. So I guess in the same way, there's this symbiosis, right, with voice as well. And the more that they can continue to synchronize and stay in tune with each other, that we have this triad, right? There's mind, body, voice, really. I think there's probably more than that, but mind, body, voice is the main three. They are constantly in communication with each other, feeding off one another. Like the stuff that I would do with Imogen, sometimes it could be a very external thing. Like she'd say to me, imagine that, there's not something behind you, and the thing that's behind you, means harm, right? It's not a benevolent thing, whatever it is behind you. And then what you're going to do is you're going to move backwards towards it, right? And she managed to get this, this wave of energy through my body, did not want to go in that direction. And it sort of created this, I'm talking about on Chesil Beach now, but this thing that happened to my body, and my shoulders did something interesting. And she's like, yeah, okay, that's really interesting. That's how, when you see an older person, maybe in their 70s or 80s, their shoulders carry. It's not just the kind of the necessity or circumstantial thing that's happened over time. It is all of those things, right? But it's also this emotional thing that causes your body to become something other, become something else. So whether it's conscious and sort of an external thing working internally, which does happen, it can sometimes feel arbitrary a bit and a bit artificial initially. But, then you start to kind of assimilate those things and they become someone. So, yeah, of course, I had these external factors on the mountain, like the cold. It was just really cold, and that changes your physicality. But then cold does something really interesting to you psychologically, and the way in which you talk to the person next to you. You keep your mouth really closed, right? Because you can't move the muscles in your face quite as much. All of that stuff fascinates me. I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but it feels like a collection of thoughts. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, I really love all of that detail and all of those thoughts. It's great. And also want to talk a little bit about the psychological elements of your character as well, because like you mentioned, he's gone up this mountain. We're not sure why he's there. And there's a real push and pull between him wanting to be just left alone by Naomi Watts' character and really kind of resisting everything that she's trying to do for him and bringing him back down. And then at the same time, there are moments where he allows her to help, and there's kind of a little bit of a shift at a certain point. And so how did you navigate the space of your character to find the moments where he's just fully resistant, the time where he's a little bit more cognizant of, if I make this particular action and try to resist, then I'm endangering someone else, and then kind of the moments where it's actually for himself that he wants to allow her to do things for him as well?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because I think, fortunately or not, a lot of the work happens kind of retroactively. So, you look back at what happened, and I try to apply a sort of another type of sanity or logic to the events that occurred on the side of this mountain. It's very difficult to do because the rules don't apply, and I think actually that notion is ever present in this story, or stories of a similar ilk as well, in that the same rationality, the same logic that you and I share here, or where you are right now, maybe. I can't speculate, but I imagine that you do. That they don't apply when you're in a situation like this. And there's this. When you're out on you go out on a hike or something, and I remember this from when I was a kid, like my granddad said to me, when you see someone, when you're on the side of a hill or side of a mountain, and you're out by yourself and they're out by yourself, you make sure you say hello. And he's like, and there's a really good reason for that. You're not saying hello just to be polite. There's this sort of etiquette there that is a nod from one human being to another human being saying, if I am in danger, my life is in danger, I know that you are here, that you are somewhere nearby. That if you hear a whistle, or you see a flare go off, or you hear someone shouting, or you see rocks tumble, you were the last person that saw me. And that's the etiquette. That is it is spoken in this, but it's a kind of an unspoken contract between two human beings. For me, that level of communication is so powerful. I think it's something that we don't do it really, in a sort of everyday sense. Or if we do, sometimes it's more meaningful, or it's more, some people are more cognizant of that going on a lot of the time. when they make eye contact with you, it's for a purpose, it's for a meaning. They're sort of saying to you, look, I recognize you are a human being. I'm a human being. There's no imminent danger now, but just know that I'm here, right? It's, that kind of level of connectivity really excites me. And in terms of the story, on paper, in terms of the altruism, the selflessness involved on Pam Bell's part, I mean, okay, she has a badge that says that she's the Pemigewasset, search and rescue volunteer. So we learned that pretty early on, that she volunteers her time, to do that. And in terms of what actually has happened in Pam's, history, there is a good reason for that. Also, we think we could tie those things together. But on paper, you could argue she has absolutely no reason to put her own life in danger to such an extent when I think someone's just described him as recalcitrant. And I'm like, there's some truth in that. Yeah. I mean, there are reasons. I mean, it's very difficult for me to sort of explain it away, or it sounds like I'm trying to excuse that behavior. I mean, my rebuttal, if you like, to that would be how many of us have actually been in true near-death situations, such as that is, whether we have intended to put ourselves in them or not. And so let's say, hypothetically, and in this case, I think it's fair to say, John has put himself intentionally in harm's way, with a view to ending his life. And that in itself is, it's a whole can of worms. I mean, we would need another 2 hours to maybe unpick that, and we don't have that luxury. And maybe people don't want to watch a survival movie that's, another 2 hours long. I don't know. And I don't want to be as reductive as that, because I think it's so much more than a survival movie. Or if it's a survival movie, it's like all capital letters survival movie, because it's about the nature of survival itself, and it's about what it means to be alive in the first place, and it's about choice and this kind of ultimate choice that John has, and this avenue that he's chosen to go down. So it's sort of ending his own life, and then someone that becomes nothing, very little more than a sort of symbolic representation of a glimmer of hope, which even, at that point where John is at psychologically, that I think is like sickly sweet. And it's like the last thing that I think he wants to encounter. It's like, the idea of angels or savior or like hope, it's all like covered in glitter, and like it's like, syrupy. That's what it feels like to me. And so it's kind of the last thing he wants. So in a way, it's no surprise, or it certainly wasn't to me. And this is what I mean about the sort of wild, different rationality, different logic that applies up there in his state of mind and in his physiological state as well. It's no surprise to me at all that he turns his nose up at it. And actually his immediate gut reaction is disgust. He's repulsed by the idea of being saved, of going home, of finding comfort, of being okay, because nothing is okay, fundamentally. And I think, in the denouement, in like the moment in which we get some of John explaining, why he went up there in the first place, it's to find something that he in his rational mind knows isn't there, right? If you're talking about in terms of pure rationality, scientific thinking, he knows that he's not going to find a person that he's loved outside of a mountain. And I think he sits down, realizes that passivity is possibly the best way to go, because if you just sit still, if there is life after death or ghosts exist, then there's a higher chance that he might find that person again. And I think that's, I mean, it's a big thing, and we had a limited amount of time to try and put that in at the end of the story in a way, but hopefully it was present, throughout the rest of the storytelling. And I think hopefully that answers your question in terms of how much of our understanding of basic human psychology applies when you're in a position such as Pam and John are in the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and going back as well to what you were saying about, it's not just a movie about survivalism. There's all these other elements to it. One of those feels like it's very much about the emotional connection between strangers that people can have, and for both of these characters, they both come from a place of real loss and grief and trauma, and that's part of the connection between the two of them, even though they never share any details about their life whilst they're in this moment. They're not saying any of these things out loud, and yet there's still that kind of like emotional connect in the undercurrent. And so I was really interested in the dynamic of working with Naomi Watts on this film, because it's not about building out a backstory with your characters, figuring out the undercurrent of the words they say to each other, but it's really about the intrinsic nature of your performances and the real subtle moments and exchanges between the two of them, where these emotions are present, but they're not saying these things out loud to one another or really describing and explaining themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's again on a sort of human recognition level. Naomi's incredibly good at that. I mean, there's a whole world, in these two globes in her skull, in her eyes. It's like there's a whole world in there. There's many worlds in there, and there's so many possibilities there, and she makes that known. I don't mean in a sort of showy off way, but she's there, she's present with you, and she's saying, look, this is my offer, this is what I propose, and she will meet you halfway, and is incredibly generous in terms of how much of a story she can tell. And sometimes I'm looking at this like begoggled face, and it's like it's tricky, right? Because there's always an obstacle, whatever the obstacle might be. It's and there's a wind machine, and it's cold, and that's in a way that's acting, right? There's all these sort of real life obstacles, and then the obstacles in the story too, and then John's reluctance, reticence in having that recognition, that acknowledgement, that connectivity, because the chances are it's going to be pretty painful to even go there. So he opens up about as much as I think he's able to at that time, at that point in time. And it's only the recognition comes as it's an off-screen moment when John is driven off and managed to sleep for days, probably, and lick his wounds emotionally as well, probably, and this sort of return, in the real world, it was a letter, and it came in the form of a letter written to Pam Bales, and in this, that letters do sometimes, still feature in films. But what I imagine is that the scene actors, when there's this, it's no longer a MacGuffin. It's like you get a close-up, extreme close-up of an old, antiquated piece of paper that's vignetted, and it has like the explanation as to what's just happened in the last however long in the film, and that's kind of I think how it operates. But in some ways it felt thankless, because obviously I guess my instinct as a human being all the time is to try to be as connected to the person next to you and not just be a hindrance. And I can imagine, like, in fact, when I watched it, I was like, God, that is, the sort of obstinance, the kind of, the stubbornness, and like, just be helped, and I can understand why people would be so frustrated and possibly shouting at John saying, Naomi Watts is trying to save you off the side of a mountain, just be helped. And it's like, so I get it. But I think that's also true. I think what's great is that in itself is also true. There is this, I mean, I know this for myself. I mean, when we feel sort of frustration at our own, depths of sorrow or depression or whatever it might be. Some people it's just not I say just low mood, but it could be low mood or low self-esteem, and those are the things I get most infuriated with myself, And so I think it's really truthful, and I think it should feel frustrating and frustrating to watch. And we should be questioning, how much of a saboteur really is John, and who is he trying to sabotage? Is he trying to take Pam Bales with him? And it's yeah, I don't know, who might speculate, but I think that's all present in our storytelling. Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting aspects of that question is the letter that he sent to her afterwards that you were mentioning, because within that, he talks about having a real intention of going up there and being very aware and cognizant that he didn't want to kind of cause the same outcome for someone else, and that really changed everything for him. And so did just that crux of the letter, and knowing that he had a real awareness of Pam and what she was trying to do for him, did that kind of create certain choices within him as a character, or motivations that you wanted to see in him?
Yeah, I mean, I think when she first manages to get him off the ground and he's in, completely delirious. I would hate for anyone to ever experience, hypothermia, but it's scary stuff. And the level of like delirium that people, their decision-making ability is completely kaput. That's it. They don't know what's going on, basically. And and then for someone to sort of, derobe you, put new dry clothes on, put you in a bivouac tent, make sure until your body core temperature's warmed up, all of that stuff during a storm, which, by the way, we did for real, basically, in a, it -20 temperatures or something crazy. And that's all pretty real. So the way I was feeling after that, there's very little acting going on, I think, if I'm completely honest. And and the sort of, we talked about, levels of inebriation, and then the sort of like, the selfishness in choosing to do. And I'm really kind of hesitant myself to use that word, but because it seems so judgmental, right? But to embroil someone else in that, and to possibly, put them in harm's way because you have chosen to do something, selfish or not, is hugely problematic, I think, for most sort of compassionate people. And what's interesting is that obstacle in itself actually ends up changing John's objective quite considerably, because suddenly sabotage becomes flipped on its head and becomes something else. It's like, well, actually, I now have a joint responsibility with this other human being to try to get both of us off the side of the mountain. Now, what the fuck am I going to do? My not only is my plan scuppered, but I've got to rethink everything, and so it forces him to sort of. And we don't get to see this, and I'm kind of glad we don't. But what's lovely about it is he has gone away, and he's had sort of several probably dark nights of the soul, and these huge conversations with himself, and something has made him put pen to paper in the real world, or in our story, to go and find Pam, to look for some clarity. And I think probably the most poignant question he has to ask her, because he recognizes that the only thing really that would make her choose to volunteer to do that is that if she understood the fragility of the human condition. And so because she knows that, is witness to that, she knows what that is, and she carries that with her, that makes her do what she does for John. And so he asks her, does it get easier? And she basically says no. It doesn't. That you learn to manage it. Life carries on, right? And sorry, I feel like I've gone off piste a bit. That I haven't. There's another one off piste. I'm not answering your question anymore. But no, I think it does definitely change things in terms of how I chose to characterize John. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so insightful. And like you said, you could spend a whole 2 other hours just looking on all of the genesis of the decisions that he makes and what leads him to certain points throughout the movie. And so it's been really wonderful hearing all about everything that went into creating this performance. So congratulations on the film. And thank you so much, Billy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.